So roof details. This is what we're going to be discussing today, and it varies throughout south of United States as far as north of United States is concerned. But we're gonna first overall just talk about the general concept of what a roof is supposed to be doing. And then from there, we're gonna talk about how to detail a roof. Now, one of the first thing I want you to take into account is that roof usually is dealt with or built by trusses. Usually they're wood trusses, and the most important distinction between the two trusses is we're either looking at a Fink truss, which is a W truss, or a Howe truss. And they're just distinct by shape, but these are trialed and tested over time. And after the truss is done, the second major component of the roof, besides from shedding water, is ventilating your roof. Now, we are going to talk about the ridge vent, and we're going to primarily focus on a wood frame roof that is well ventilated, and we're going to talk about the soffit detail as well as a ridge vent detail. But these are the things that I want you to take into account. So when the roof is at fascia, the two important details is usually right at the connections, which is going to be right at the ridge, valleys, and fascia. Fascia being what faces out to the street. So the first thing I wanted to show you guys specifically is I took a bunch of the projects that I have done in the past. I'm very fascinated when it comes to roof details at gutter conditions and how a metal roof sheds into a gutter, or whether that gutter is hidden behind a parapet wall. And this is metal frame construction. But we're going to primarily focus on wood frame construction when it comes to looking at a roof at a gable facing towards you, and that's where the fascia would go. Or you have a hip roof that has a fascia board in front of it. Now, obviously, you can put another board here. The gutter can sink down, and there could be a shadow board, and so on and so forth. But we're going to talk about what happens after the truss is made and what happens right on top of the double top plate. So, as we were discussing in our previous video, how a floor transition is done, after the floor transition, you still have the same layers coming up. So, I'm going to offset over 1/2 inch for my gyps sheathing, for my exterior sheathing. 1/2 inch for my exterior sheathing. Then I'm going to offset again 5.5 inches for my 2x6 wall. And I'm going to offset 1/2 inch inward for my gyp that goes on the interior wall. Now, depending on where my floor height is or where my double top plate ends, I'm going to go ahead and draw my rectangles. They're going to be 5.5 inches, actual size of wood, comma, 1.5 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and draw an X through them. And for the sake of reference, that's where we're going to end our double top plate. Again, your double top plate varies based on the stud size you choose, depending on the wall height that you have chosen. But let's just assume that that's where the wall ends. This is where your exterior sheathing is. Since we're in the south, I'll do a whole another video on where the vapor barrier should go, but in the south, it should be on the exterior of the gyp sheathing. So I'm going to offset an additional 0.25 inches. And since we're not dealing with layers, I'm just going to go ahead and make that a hidden line, LT scale. So that's where our vapor barrier is. And then on top of that, we're going to go ahead and put our siding. I'm just going to do PL. Let's do 8 inches. For the sake of reference, let's just go ahead and offset 1.25 inches. So we have our siding board. We'll just assume that there's a hardy panel board here. And that's our siding. We could also, let's just say, let's just make it stucco. So that's where your floor technically ends, or the top of your stud framing wall ends. Right on top of that is where you will have your truss sit, right? So I'm going to go ahead and draw this line, and we're going to assume that this truss, where it lands on here, we have an overhang of, let's say, 2 feet. And I'm going to go up 3.5 inches. Usually, all your trusses are going to be made out of 2x4s. And let's assume a pitch of 312. So I'm just drawing out the roof truss. Offset again, 3.5 inches. And I'm going to use the TR command to trim out where the connection is. But you usually have a nail plate that'll go here. It's like a metal plate that will have multiple nails on it. They'll just hammer in to connect these wood together. And that's where your truss is, and this might turn into a Fink truss or a Howe truss. Now, on top of your truss, you end up, so the insulation requirements, as you can see in my drawing here, you're supposed to be pretty much insulating up to R38, which is the current code right now, and R13 minimum requirement for your walls. And as that come up, it's only supposed to be everywhere that you have an enclosure. So your insulation can technically end right here. As we saw in the diagram here too, as we were talking about roof ventilation, your insulation technically ends right here. This airspace is necessary for your soffits to breathe and be able to let out the hot air in your attic. Now, contrary to popular belief, your attic should be around 120, 110 degrees, maybe around 10 to 20 degrees warmer than the outside air. It should not be exceeding 30, 40 degrees excess of outside air, because you really have an issue with your framing start waning. And that means the wood or the framing in your roof has started to leak out the oils that the wood has inside of it. Over time, the wood will become harder, but it will become more brittle because it will lose that flexibility. So therefore, they have roof vents nowadays, or just to allow the insulation from not clogging the soffit vent area, so the air can flow all the way around and come out the ridge vent. So how we're going to detail our soffit, for now, all I need you to worry about is whenever we're getting down to this detail, we're looking at a hardy panel soffit. And a hardy panel soffit is usually about, because it's a thin panel, it's about 1/4 of an inch or 3/16. So for the sake of a reference, I'm going to go ahead and draw it at a 1/4 inch. And I'm just going to place that there. Again, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this line because that's where technically our siding ends. And our siding, we can angle it. That's for a later time. And right here, right where you have your fascia, it is common practice now to put in a flush 2x4 or a nailer board. So you have a straight soffit that you can you have a straight edge which you can nail your fascia board to. So since we already have you have a 3.5 inch here, you can nail a 1x4, or what I recommend is a 2x4, which will give you higher rigidity and you have less waviness when it comes to your fascia. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a rectangle here that's going to be 1.5 inches, comma, 3.5. Again, this will be continuous. And I'm going to go ahead and put that right at the edge here. Now, my trim board here, let me just go ahead and get rid of this vertex. So that's where my my soffit vent dies. Now, just to cover up this joint, because you need room for your soffit board to expand, so in reality you might cut your soffit board just slightly shorter. There's no need for any type of caulking or anything here required. But when it comes to how your trim dies, I highly recommend doing trims that do not overlap on top of your siding. Let your siding die into your trim. It creates a much cleaner detail, and at the same time, it is easier to caulk this corner and caulk this corner right here, or this edge, knowing full well that your soffit is well covered. So this is how I like to do my trims, and this is something that is particular in my taste. Same thing here. I would rather have my soffit die sooner and put my trim right around here. I'd rather do that. Now, these trims can be straight off of Hardy website. They have trims. You can also buy weather-treated trims. This is really entirely up to your budget, how much you want to spend per linear feet based on client budget. But rest assured, what you want to do is with your trims, do not have them overlap onto your siding. Do not have them overlap. But you should be wrapping everything you can. So now that you have your roof coming down, and you can obviously cut this at an angle and create that slope, or you can have it flush into your truss. What you want to have on top of your truss is your plywood decking. Now, we do 19.5 inches on center in the south. Even if we are doing commercial, we specify minimum of 15 32nd CDX plywood. OSB has become very common, so I specify 3/4 of an inch plywood or 3/4 inch OSB, which is 23 32nds. So we're going to go ahead and offset 23 32nds for this one. So 0.75 inches for the sake of reference. That's where our plywood layer goes. Now that plywood will continue until the edge, and I would just make this board sit in the truss, if that makes sense. And I'm going to stretch this over. The next thing I want you to understand is on top of your plywood edge, you're looking at number 15 felt, which is very common. They have now drainage mats that are proprietary to each installer. I'm not going to specify any brands, but there are far better products than number 15 felt that are out there in the market. Number 30 felt is no longer around. So this is what what you have as your secondary layer, and then on top of this is where you will have your shingles. Now you could draw them as staircases, or you can have them drawn as a singular line, and those are what your layers are when it comes to your top of your roof. So I'm going to go ahead and offset another a quarter inch, and I'm just going to make this a solid line just so you can understand the reference. This could be your shingles. This is your number 15 felt. This is the top edge of your plywood. This is the top edge of your truss and the bottom edge of your plywood. That's what you're representing here. Now, right here is where you have potential for leaks. And this is where you need to pay particular attention to how you detail this. Now, I like to finish off this edge with my fascia board. Right off the bat, fascia board gets placed right here. Your fascia board should exceed the length or exceed the trim on this side, because you really want to create this as a drip edge. The next thing I want you to focus on is how you're going to finish off this detail. This number 15 felt is all safe and sound here, but you can really put in a drip edge, a metal flashing that goes between your shingles, and this drip edge should be between your shingles and at the edge of your number 15 felt, and it should be nailed somewhere around here. And I'm going to turn ortho off for this, and it will come in right over your fascia board, like so. It's very important for it to go over your fascia board. Now, if you were to put in your gutters or anything like that, that will get tucked behind this drip edge. And then you'll have a screw that will drive in and hopefully go into your nailer board. And that's how you would do a detail right at the fascia. So this is the basics of a roof detail at a fascia condition would look like. Your plywood can be cut at an angle. Your fascia board is normally going to remain straight. So I'm just going to go ahead and straighten this out. Most of the time, they will stop this short. This is what's the most important part. You're not supposed to have a leak here. Now, there's various ways you can have a shadow edge. You can have multiple things, but the basics of roof at fascia detail will remain the same. So when you're looking at any type on the internet, you might come across a shadow board which will pretty much have the drip edge go on top of, and you can have the gutter get tucked in. You can have fairly the concept is the same.